Hello, I'm Dr. Jonathan Oates, Archivist for the London Borough of Ealing, and right now I'm standing outside the Dominion Centre and Library in Southall. There have been a number of buildings on this site. The first known building was a farm. This was knocked down in the 1870s. A large mansion was built by a man called Alfred Welch. It was called Featherston Hall. It was a large house of 36 rooms with a large wall with windows around the garden. Because it cost as much as £20,000, it was known as Welch's Folly. By 1891, it was no longer a house, but was a private mental asylum for women from wealthy families. It would accommodate up to 10 women inmates and at least 15 servants and attendants. In 1901, it was discovered that the female inmates were aged between 46 and 75, and some were born in Australia, New Zealand and Ireland, as well as England. In 1911, Dr. Millward was the proprietor, and later on there was a Dr. Leveron in charge. Now, despite it being a mental hospital, it was clearly not seen as being a sinister place, because in the 1920s, garden parties and fetes were held in the grounds of the asylum. The asylum eventually closed in 1931, and in 1934 the house was demolished by a company called Thompson and Thompson, who had a super cinema built here. This was called the Dominion Cinema. It was Southall's fifth and final cinema. The cinema was built by the Hanson brothers, who built a lot of buildings in Southall at this time. The cinema was opened on the 14th of October 1935 by the famous Lancastrian actress Gracie Fields. As well as being able to show films, there were also restaurants and lounges in the building. There was a generous car park for patrons, and it did very well indeed. However, in the 1950s, less people went to cinemas because they could watch films on TV at home, and by 1962 the Dominion Cinema closed. 3 years later, in 1965, the Indian Workers Association, a newly formed pressure group for the local Indian population, purchased the cinema, and they used it to show Indian language films. Initially, English films were also shown, but not many people went to them, and the cinema did very well indeed, showing just Indian language films. By 1970, the cinema was making £65,000 a year, a very large sum of money indeed. But the cinema building was used for other purposes as well. As said, the Indian Workers Association had hired and rented the building. They eventually purchased it outright in 1973. But they used it to hold meetings for cultural, educational and political purposes. In 1969, the Prime Minister of India, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, spoke to a crowded meeting at the Dominion Centre. As the years went by, however, the demand for the cinema went down, and by the end of the 1970s, not many people were going to this cinema, and therefore it closed. In 1982, the building was demolished, and Ealing Council built an arts centre on the site titled the Dominion Centre. The Dominion Centre is used by many community groups for educational purposes, for classes to teach children karate, as well as English and maths, and for many other groups for cultural, religious, social purposes. In more recent years, it is now home to Southall Library. As well as the library, there is also a permanent display of Martin ware, which are the pots made by the Martin brothers of Southall at the beginning of the 20th and the end of the 19th century. If you like this, please do remember to subscribe to Ealing Library's YouTube channel. Thank you.